All right. So we like to start every day with a fun statistic. So let me start this one. This one's horrible. Daily, the research shows that daily kids spend between 4 and 7 hours a day on screens. This is a pre-COVID statistic, so we know it's worse now. And they only spend 7 minutes a day playing outside. So if you scale this up from one day to an entire week, kids are spending more than an entire 24-hour period on screens, and they're only spending less than an hour outside every single week. So our kids' lives right now are being dominated by screens. And I kind of want to give you a picture of what this looks like according to the statistics that we have. So this is our world. So if you look at your notes in your workbook, there's a little space up here that you can draw this model if you're interested. If you don't want to draw a model, you certainly don't have to, but there's a space there if you want to take some notes as we talk through this. So our world today is full of about 7.8 billion, and 2.2 billion of those are children. And another fun fact about our world today is that our children have more opportunities than any other kids in any other time in history. So thousands and thousands of years, right? As humans, our kids, our generation, this generation today has more opportunities than any have ever had in the past. We provide them with all kinds of sports. We provide them with music opportunities. We provide them with academic enrichment like Lego club and, coding club and robotics and all these other things. Our kids have so many more opportunities than they've ever had in the past. However, our children are also the unhealthiest generation of the modern age. So since we started having medicine, since we started having sanitation, and all these other great things that make our society so great, since we started having all those, basically our kids are the unhealthiest generation since that time. So here's some really depressing statistics. Again, 1 in 3 are overweight and 1 in 5 are obese. When I was a kid, probably had about 1 overweight child per class. So 1 in 25, right? Let's see, 27% have a chronic health condition. 1 in 8 suffer from anxiety. 1 in 12 are depressed. And suicide is the second leading cause of death for adolescents. So here's the picture I want to paint. It's this huge dichotomy, right? Where you have our kids are the unhealthiest generation of kids in the modern age. And yet we provide them with more opportunities than kids have ever had in the history of humankind. And here's basically what the research says, is that a lot of this is happening because our kids are migrating indoors. They're starting to develop a very different type of childhood than they've ever experienced in the past. Because not too long ago, all kids played outside. Today, very, very few kids play outside. And the thing is, we want our kids to be happier, healthier, and smarter, right? We want them to grow up to be happy and healthy adults that are successful at whatever career they choose. But our kids are growing up with these health issues because research shows us that if a child has some type of condition in their childhood, that follows them into adults. So if you have a child that's overweight, they will become an overweight adult. If you have a child who is anxious, they will become an anxious adult, and so on. So it follows them into adulthood. And not to say that some of these don't have a genetic component, because they do. And, some kids are going to need medications. Some kids are going to need therapy and these other types of things. But in general, a lot of this can be addressed because this wasn't true even when I was a kid 30 years ago, okay? So a lot of this can be addressed by nature, and we know that through the scientific literature, and that's what we're going to be sharing with you guys today. We can basically bridge and go from this world of kids who are very unhealthy, but they're given all these kinds of opportunities, and we can walk them along this bridge to a space where our kids are the ones that are happier and healthier and smarter. All right. So again, there is hope, right? Those statistics aren't an end-all be-all. We can change that as parents. We can change our kids' lives by doing a number of different things. And these are the things that we're going to be talking about this week. And again, the research shows that nature makes our kids happier, healthier, and smarter. So let's get into the details a little bit about that. One thing that I do want to remind you, a lot of people kind of argue that, oh, we live in the city. We don't have nature around. I do want to remind you that nature is everywhere. So these are one of our families in Nature Matters Academy, and here they are outside in their own backyard studying flowers. So if you live in an apartment, nature might be the closest park, or nature might be plants on a windowsill or plants on the landing. So nature can be found everywhere. It doesn't always have to be wild nature. All right, so let's answer this question, then we're going to get into the research. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to answer this actually in the comments, because at the end of this talk, we're going to go back and I'm going to answer some of these, and Teresa's going to help. So what struggles do you face when trying to create the nature experiences that you want your kids to have? So it could be not enough time. It could be, I'm just not sure what to do. It could be, I have a heck of a time just getting out the door. It could be your kid has sensory issues. Like, what are the struggles that you face when it comes to trying to create the nature experiences that you want for your kids? All right. Let's see. So go ahead and fill those out in the comments below, and then we're going to start talking about the research. All right. So for those of you guys who don't know me, my name is Jenny Lloyd Strovis. I'm a biologist, researcher, educator, and mom. I was in the academic world for a really long time, and I loved it there. But as soon as I became a mom, I learned that my research didn't go further than the other researchers, and most of those other researchers didn't have kids. So my research was actually the human-nature connection. How do we get people connected to nature? How do we get people outside so that they'll care for our natural resources? What types of experiences do we need to give them at what age? And the problem that I ran into is I'm doing all this research, I'm going to conferences, and I am presenting it, but it wasn't having a lasting change. And so that's what we do in this group. That's what we do in Nature Matters Academy, is we take all this amazing research that's being done and we give it to parents so they can use it for their own children to better their lives of their own kids. All right. So today we're talking about the golden ticket to raising happy kids who grow into balanced adults. So the first one here on your notes, nature makes our kids happier. That's what we're going to talk about first. And I'll give you a couple of bullet points here in a second, but right now we just want to fill out that nature makes our kids happier. So here is just one study of many, but I pulled it out because number one, it's recent. Number two, it has a huge sample size. So last year, a research study was published, and it was based on a sample size of about 3,500 adults who are living in Europe. And basically what they did is they compared the mental health status of that adult with their exposure to nature as a child. And they found some pretty interesting things. So the first one they found, the first kind of a big idea that they found is that kids that were exposed to low levels of nature as a child, so they didn't get outside much, they really didn't care about nature much when they got older. And we all know this person, right? We all know the person that grew up, constantly inside, constantly on the TV or playing video games or whatever it is. And they're the ones who are littering and not conserving water and letting water run when they brush their teeth. All the simple things that we do on a daily basis, they don't care about. So that was one of the findings that they found. The other one, now this is a really, really, really big one. So what they found is that the group of adults that said that, hey, we didn't really spend much time outside, they found out that they had significantly higher levels of mental health issues as adults. So they didn't necessarily have them as kids, but they developed them as adults. And then on the opposite side of that coin, the group that had a lot of nature exposure, weekly nature exposure as a kid, they grew up and they had significantly less mental health issues. So they had good mental health as an adult. So as a parent, this is something that you can literally take today and use it to help better your kids' future, because this is not the only study like this. There are a lot of studies that are done on kids that show that nature improves mental health, reduces stress, and all these other things. And there's also studies done on adults that look at experiences that they had in childhood, like this one does, and show that the adults are also doing better. And so if this week you say from here on out, for the rest of their childhood, we're going to get outside at least once a week, you can kind of take that to the bank and say that your kids are probably going to have better mental health in the future. Now, there's always stuff that happens, and life is crazy, but in general, you are setting them up for success, and that's really, really important. This is the name of that study. If you guys want to look it up, I'm not going to pause here because we need to keep moving, but you can come back. This video is recorded, and you can come back and you can actually look up these studies if you want to see them. I want to make sure you have that information. I think that's important. So nature makes kids happier by helping them. Again, this is based on scientific research. Helps them better cope with stress, helps them improve their relationship skills, helps them better deal with anger and aggression, and improves their resilience. So here on our worksheet for today, we have nature makes our kids happier, and by getting them outside, I can. And then you're going to list, what are the two things that really stand out to you here? What are the two things that you want the most for your kids in terms of being happier? So I'll tell you what I wrote. By getting them outside, I can teach them resilience and teach them to better cope with stress. And so here's the difference between what we do in this group and what other parents do. Other parents assume that by getting them outside, they'll be able to deal with stress, and there's not anything extra added to that. In this group, we say, hey, be explicit with your kids. Go outside and, ask them, maybe when they're angry, take them outside, go and do something fun, and then ask them how they feel. And, say, okay, well, you were angry at first because maybe I told you to get off the computer screen, right? And now you're feeling happy. What do you think made you happy? And they're going to talk about being outside and the fresh air and the sun and the sounds. And so essentially you are explicitly showing them that by being outside, it does help us to lower our anger. It does help us to manage our stress. All right, so I would like for you guys, if you don't mind, the two that really stand out to you, put them in the comments and let me see them. Is it resilience? Is it relationship skills? What does that look like for you? All right, and then I do want to share stories and help you guys to know that this really happens, right? That you can kind of count on this stuff happening later. So here's our friend Mike. He is a falconer and an air traffic controller. So as a kid, he spent a lot of time outside. He was the kid that was hunting and fishing. He was reading adventure novels about nature, and he was a nature kid. And now as an adult, he has the most stressful job in the world. So it really goes back and forth between ER surgeons and air traffic controllers as to who has a more stressful job. And the type of air traffic controller that he is, he basically sits in a dark room for 8 hours a day looking at a black screen with little red dots. And his job is to make sure that those little red dots don't run into each other. And sometimes that's really hard, right? Because there are a lot of planes in the airspace at any given time. So air traffic controllers are considered one of the most stressful jobs in the world. But he is one of the most laid back people. And it's largely because he grew up outside and learned that was a way that he could cope with stress. And now he uses that in falconry, and he's getting his birds out hunting almost every single day. He's walking around in some nature space and he's interacting with nature. He's interacting with his birds. And it's just a beautiful thing. So again, make sure that you guys put them in the comments. Let's see what we have here. Reduce stress, become more resilient. Yes, Vanessa. Better cope with stress for us too, for Teresa. Relationship skills and dealing with frustrations for Laura. Heidi, better cope with stress and anger and aggression. Yes. Gina, reduce anxiety, cope with stress. All of those are so incredibly important. So now what we want to talk about is nature makes our kids healthier. So that's bullet number 2. Nature makes our kids healthier. This is a really cool study. Okay, so one of my favorite, if I were to have a favorite researcher for the human-nature connection, it's Dr. King Lee, who is a scientist out of Japan. And he is one of the world's leading researchers on the health benefits of our bodies because of nature. And literally, you guys, this man is awesome. If you look him up on YouTube, he's like super nice and quiet, but he takes people out into the woods and like makes them pee in a cup. He gets blood samples, he takes blood pressure, and takes heart rate, does all these things to people, and then sends them out into the woods for 20 minutes, for an hour, whatever it might be. And then he comes back and he takes samples again and he tests all these different things. So some of these aspects of how nature makes us healthier, I'm going to share with you, are actually his studies. But I just wanted to pick out one. And I thought this one was really interesting for the times that we are currently in with COVID. But sample size was small, so just going to throw that out there. But he chose 12 healthy males who worked for large companies in Tokyo. So essentially, they were walking to work every day, and they walked a decent amount. I think it was about a mile or so that they would walk each day to and from work and while at work. And so what he did is, one of those days when they're in the city, he took a blood sample. And then he took all those guys, after taking the blood sample that was the control of them in the city, just walking around in the city and doing their normal thing, he took these group of men and took them to the woods. And he had them walk the same distance that they would walk every day at their jobs, every day at the city, but he had them walk in the forest instead of in the urban environment. And then he was taking blood samples again every day. And this is, and one of the things that he was measuring for this particular study were natural killer cells. And natural killer cells are really cool. They're part of our immune system. And they are part of our immune system that doesn't have to learn that something is bad. So most of our immune system, we have these cells that they have to learn that there's a foreign body. And then once they learn that it's foreign and that it's bad, then they attack it, right? Natural killer cells don't need to learn. They can just attack things. They're really good at fighting like precancerous cells and all that. And what he found is really interesting. And it basically, what he found is that his control blood sample at the beginning, and then this very last blood sample after they had walked the same distance, but in the woods every day for 3 days, he showed that their natural killer cells increased by almost 50% when compared to that first control blood sample. So this is huge. He's saying that these 12 men had a huge boost in their immune system simply from walking outside. And one of the things that he has discovered is that it's really because of all the phytochemicals that plants release. So think about when you go on a walk in the woods and you smell the trees and you smell that fresh, earthy smell, right? Well, a good portion of that smell is plants talking to each other. So volatile organic compounds, they release these essentially hormones into the air, and they're communicating to each other. One's like, hey, I just, got nibbled on by a rabbit. Watch out. The other one's like, man, guys, I think we're about to experience a drought. You need to, pump up your reserves or whatever. And they're talking to each other through the air. And as humans, we are bystanders walking through this environment, and we're smelling all of that in. And this guy, he's been researching this for decades. And he has found that a lot of the health benefits that we get from nature are actually from these phytoncides that plants release. And it's just because they are communicating to each other, which is amazing. This is like the coolest thing ever. And it doesn't just boost our immune system. It does all kinds of other things too. So again, this is the title of the study if you want to come back and look at that. But being in nature, and one thing I want to mention about that other study, if you notice, they were both being physically active, because everyone's like, oh, well, nature's good because you're physically active. You could get that in a gym. Turns out that's not true. They had this same level of physical activity, but they got a huge boost in their immunity. And it was from being outside in nature and from smelling essentially trees. But nature makes our kids happier by reducing the risk of obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, cortisol. This guy, Dr. Kingley, actually has people spit in a cup, and he measures cortisol levels in saliva to see how it changes after people spend time walking outside. Vitamin D deficiency. So I think a lot of parents know this, but vitamin D deficiencies in developed countries is really, really high. In the United States, I want to say that our level is around 62% of American kids are deficient in vitamin D, and that's simply from not being outside. So it's very easily fixable. And then nearsightedness is another one. So these are some of the many benefits that nature gives you from being outside. So I do want to reference back to that study and how they had a 50% increase in their natural killer cells. And really, Dr. Kingley, he suggests at least once a week, just getting outside and being in nature. If you can do it more, that's great. But once a week really gives you that dose of vitamin N, vitamin nature, that helps our kids be healthier. Now, it may not mean that your kids are going to have a 50% increase in their natural killer cells, right? First of all, these were grown men. The study was done in Japan. They have a culture that is a very healthy culture, and just in general. Number two, the trees in Japan are going to be different than some of the trees here. So there's going to be some differences that don't necessarily equate specifically to your family and your kids. But in general, you can take away the message that if you get your kids outside at least once a week for the rest of their childhood, that you are giving them a huge boost in their health. Plus, you're teaching them that they can go outside and walk, and that's going to manage their weight, and that's going to manage their stress and lots of other things. So as you're thinking about it, think about those things. And then I want you to put your top two here, and then put your top two in the comments below, because we want to be able to look through those. So we're not the only people that think that nature is good for kids. And these are pictures of Lucille Packard's Children's Hospital. And this is it's in California. And this is a children's hospital that's part of the Stanford University system. So very, very prestigious university, very prestigious research university. And they were early adopters of nature in healthcare. So they basically built a children's hospital with two things in mind, two things that they wanted to focus on. One was, and both of these were based on what makes kids heal the fastest: family and nature. So everything that they did for building this hospital, all the outdoor spaces that they made were made with nature in mind. So they planted native plants. As you can see here, they have statues of native animals. It's all based on Californian ecosystems. So it was local, which I love. Thank goodness it wasn't a rainforest. But it was local ecosystems. But they also brought nature inside, and they used art. Nature art spaces where families could gather together. And every single floor has decks for kids to get outside and experience nature. The hospital is surrounded by 3.5 acres of gardens and landscaped areas where they can play and gather. And so I think it's important for parents as us to know that if a leading research university is spending millions and millions of extra dollars building healthcare facilities for children based on the ideas of family and nature, that is incredibly powerful. And that tells us that it works, because they wouldn't do it if it didn't work, and they wouldn't do it if they knew how incredibly powerful it is. And we can do this in our own homes, right? By simply getting our kids outside and getting them engaged with nature. And also, I want to say the family and the nature aspect, these are also values in Nature Matters Academy, because we know how important it is to get outside, but we know how important it is to do that at the family level. And that's something that we really try to encourage. And of course, that's why we do the boot camp. So again, based on that list, you guys go ahead and type in your answers. Let's see if I already have some coming up. All right, cortisol levels and vitamin D for Gina, yes. Cortisol and vitamin D for Heidi. Obesity and vitamin D for Megan. Reduce risk of vitamin D deficiency and stress hormones for Juliet. Absolutely. All those are so incredibly important, because those are all pieces of the puzzle that make our kids healthier. All right, this one is a lot of fun. I chose a very large scale study for this because I wanted you guys to see how powerful nature can be for learning in all disciplines, in all areas. So there was a study that was published about 20 years ago. I realize it's a little old, but again, good study. They had a sample size of 40 schools from at least 12 US states, and there were schools at all levels. So elementary, middle, and high school. And if you look at society today, really most of the nature education happens at the pre-K level. There's a little bit at the elementary level, and then it drops off significantly at the middle and high school level. So the fact that this study looked at middle and high school level too is really, really important, because our older kids need it too. So basically what they did is they created programs in each of these 40 schools where they integrated the environment into the school curriculum. So it wasn't a nature club after school. It wasn't something that they did on Mondays. It was integrated into the entire curriculum. So they had hands-on learning outside, project and problem-based learning outside in all areas, right? Integrating multiple disciplines into lessons and activities. So they go outside to learn science, and they're taking, they're using math to take data, and then they're writing stories about it for ELA, and then they are creating a civic project for social studies, right? So they are integrating all that together. And while they're doing that, they're developing a knowledge and an understanding for local nature. So here's what happened because of that. So they found out that students learn more effectively in an environment-based context. And students showed much more enthusiasm for learning. So overall, they learned more effectively and they had more enthusiasm for learning. So I'm going to give you just a few stats on the different subject areas. So the students showed more success in communicating ideas and improved language arts skills. Students showed more enthusiasm for studying math and better mastery of math skills. They were better able to apply science to real world situations, right? God forbid we teach our kids things that they can actually practice in real time and, go outside and experience real things. It's a huge, powerful part of education that so many of our kids don't get enough of. And because they don't get enough of it in schools, that's why we can provide it and we can do it with them at home. They had more advanced skills in applying civic processes to real life situations. They had greater proficiency in solving problems and thinking strategically. And they acted with greater civility in groups. So not only were they doing better in ELA, math, science, and social studies, but they were thinking better. They had better problem solving skills, and they worked better and more cooperatively in groups. All right, so here is some of the research. Again, there is so much. We have spent decades researching how nature affects our children and how it affects us as adults. So I'm showing kind of little pieces of what we know so far. So nature makes them more creative. It can improve their critical thinking. And they tend to be better engaged with learning. It's more interesting, right, when you're outside. They have improved focus and attention. They are better able to manage impulse control. So if you notice these two, these are very much ADHD. There is a decent amount of research right now that shows that nature helps with ADHD symptoms. Better self-discipline, more improved academic scores, less disruptive behaviors, improved problem-solving skills, increased enthusiasm for learning. So there are so many options here. I want you guys to pick two and write them on your paper. So for example, I picked that they're learning, they're thinking more critically and they're problem solving. And then I picked that it helps to regulate their ADHD because that's a problem that we deal with. So as you guys are writing those down, let me check on this real quick and make sure we are good. All right. I'm not so sure that we're good because I'm not seeing what it should be, but that's okay. So I'm going to skip this story because I want to save some time. But essentially what we know is that nature is an essential part of childhood development. We have hundreds and hundreds, probably even thousands of studies that show how nature is good for us, but how it's especially important in childhood. And that hypothesis is called the biophilia hypothesis. And it's this idea that we are naturally inclined to nature. And then if you take that nature away, then, we get kind of wonky. We get kind of off kilter because we're so innately attuned to nature. And essentially, the golden ticket to raising happy and healthy kids is nature.